mood lighting. Okay, so last week, Thursday, we ended talking about evolution, human evolution, talking about skin color. So we're just going to go through the last few slides because I like them. I didn't want to skip it. So we were talking about the evolution of skin color. Again, this was when we were talking about human beings as far as all being one species, but the concept of are there races, are there different breeds of human beings? Have we diverged as populations along the lines of speciation? And most of the genetic evidence says no, we have not. Okay, that between different populations, there's as much genetic similarity as within a population. But there are certain things, certain phenotypes, or physical attributes that we can see from our genes that can make us look very different from each other, especially in different areas of the world. And one of those is skin color. Because it's such a dramatic phenotype from someone with light skin to dark skin that that was sort of the idea where a race might come in, right? They're totally different because this group of people has light skin and this group of people has dark skin, okay? But if you look at the DNA between these, it's just as similar amongst the light-skinned people as between light and dark skin, suggesting there is no genetic race. There are just wide ranges of phenotypes in certain traits that really make us look different from each other. Okay? And so one of them happens to be skin color, and since that's something that's easy to see, we're going to talk a little bit about how we think different skin colors evolved in human beings. Okay, so first we have to know that the color of your skin is based on the amount of melanin that your skin cells make, certain skin cells that make this pigment, okay, that produces that brown color. So light-skinned people have less of the cells that make the melanin, and each one of those cells they do have makes less of that pigment. Okay, so it can be twofold, right? So the reason we know that many light-skinned people have less of the actual cells is because if you can induce these cells to make more melanin. What turns on the melanin gene? What environmental deal? Sunlight, right? So even very fair people exposed to sunlight will produce a little more melanin in their skin. Very, very light-skinned people may not produce much at all, right? Whereas other very light-skinned people can get quite tan, right? You've seen that in the wintertime. You know, two friends are the same pasty whiteness, right? And they go off to spring break, and one of them comes back a nice golden tan, and the other one's still pasty white, okay? So the one that can tan had more melanocytes, more of the cells that make the pigment, right? And it's also true that even a person with light skin, at the most tan they can get, right? They've just baked themselves, or they've moved someplace where they're just cooking all the time, will never reach the same dark skin color as someone of African American descent somewhere near the equator, right? Or South America near the equator, right? Because those individuals have more cells to make more of that melanin, okay? So the light-skinned people make less pigment, and they have less of those cells, less density of those cells in their skin. So there's no way that I could ever tan myself enough beyond a certain point, just because I don't have any more of those cells, okay? So like we said, our skin cells will respond to sunlight by producing more melanin, okay? Melanin is a natural sunscreen. It helps block UV irradiation from getting down through our skin. That is important for us because UV light damages DNA and causes mutations. Yeah. So his question would be, if there was some sort of solar flare or we lose ozone and we get a lot more UV irradiation, yeah, the lighter skinned people are going to have a lot more trouble with skin cancer and other DNA damage problems than someone who has natural sunscreen, natural melanin, right? They have to, and you know, as we all know, just being in the sun at the beach, the lighter skinned people have to be much more vigilant about using sunscreen. That doesn't mean dark skinned people can't get a sunburn, but they're much more naturally protected, right? Okay. And so what you see out there in general is that the skin tone of indigenous populations correlates with geography. If you're from northern or southern climates, skin is generally lighter, right? So North America, Northern Europe, right? Very far south, whereas areas close to the equator all over the earth have much darker skin. And that makes sense with our hypothesis that it's all about UV irradiation, and the melanin is protective of your DNA and other things that we need, proteins, just based on noticing this, right? So darker, at the equator, the sun, the rays of the sun are at a direct angle to the earth, whereas in the northern and southern hemispheres, it comes in at a little bit of an angle. Okay, and so the angle of the sunlight is UV intensity. So as you move north from the equator, UV intensity lessens. So even from Southern California to Northern California or Washington, right, the UV is much stronger here than up in Washington State. So if you're out in the sun the same amount of time here as up there, you will get much more UV irradiation here. So a worse sunburn if you're a light-skinned person than someplace else in the same amount of time. Okay, so around the equator is where UV intensity is the strongest. So two things that are really important for us that are found in our skin. One is called folate or vitamin B. Okay, it's a vitamin that's absolutely necessary for stuff like DNA replication and cell division, which is really important to actually be alive. Okay. And as it turns out, intense sunlight can destroy lots of folate in light-skinned people. Okay? Folic acid is also, or folate vitamin, this vitamin B, is necessary for women to have decent amounts when they're pregnant. Okay? This is one of the vitamins that's been correlated with birth defects. Low folate levels can cause severe birth defects. Okay? So obviously, we want to protect the folate in our skin, right? So if we evolved near the equator where the UV irradiation is high, we'd want to protect ourselves with melanin so we don't destroy the folate. Whereas in North America and Europe, right, there's not so much UV intensity. We don't need so much melanin to protect that, okay? Vitamin D is actually made from a precursor in our skin when UV light strikes our skin. Okay, so you need UV irradiation to produce vitamin D. Okay. We need vitamin D and calcium for a healthy immune system and also healthy bones and teeth. Okay, so if you have vitamin D deficiency, that was a syndrome called rickets, where kids would have really soft bones and they would break and they had their bones would be bent and crooked in their legs if you have vitamin D deficiency. So that's why all milk is now fortified with vitamin D, right? They add it extra to the milk because vitamin D and calcium helps build strong bones, okay? So dark skin, in this case, would block some vitamin D production. Right? Light-skinned people will make more vitamin D than dark-skinned people in the same low UV. So it's sort of opposite ends of the spectrum. We need UV light to make vitamin D, but UV light destroys folate. Okay? So it's that balance between protecting ourselves so that our folate stays intact, but getting enough UV light in to make sure we can produce vitamin D. Okay? And so here's some examples of the stuff from the book that we were talking about. And so if you want to make good vitamin D but protect yourself from folate destruction, if you're around the equator where UV intensity is high, you have to produce a lot of melanin, right? You have to protect the folate from being destroyed. Because if you don't, the babies are going to be born with spina bifida, and it's a severe birth defect where they die almost immediately after birth, okay? But you also don't want to be so dark that you can't get any UV light in to make vitamin D. Well, if you live at the equator, you could have really, really, really dark skin, and UV is still going to make enough vitamin D for you, okay? Because UV intensity is so strong at the equator. So indigenous populations that evolved near the equator can have really dark skin to protect their folate and still make good vitamin D, just because UV intensity is so strong. Right? And then we talked about, right, those indigenous populations where hominids first evolved, and then they started moving, right? They went north out of Africa into Europe, right, over through Russia and Asia, and then back down towards the equator again. So populations that moved up north, right, let's say they moved to Sweden, okay? Not much UV radiation up there at all. That's pretty far north. So really dark skin, right, they're going to have folate out the wazoo, okay, but they're not going to make enough vitamin D because they're not going to get in enough UV because they have so much melanin protecting them, right? So the darker skinned individuals, offspring, would have premature birth, right? Soft bones, not be able to run away from a saber-toothed tiger or a polar bear, whatever the hell's up there, a saber-toothed polar bear, right? And so they'd be at a selective disadvantage, whereas those, right, if you look at a population, everybody's got a little bit different colored skin. The lighter skin would have a survival advantage up north, right? And since the dark skin is not selected for, it's selected against, over millions of years, those individuals, those populations living away from the equator would end up with lighter skin. Because those with darker skin would be at a reproductive disadvantage. Lighter skin would be at a reproductive advantage. Okay? And so that's how we think all the different, right, skin tones on the planet occurred. And really, it's just one gene, right? So it's something developmental about making how many melanocytes, and then that actual melanin gene. So a very small change, not a huge genetic difference between somebody with very light skin and somebody with very dark skin, right? It was just made a big difference in their ability to survive and reproduce at different areas on this planet, why we got such a huge dichotomy in skin color. Not because we've speciated away from, you know, in different populations of human beings. Okay, so blah, 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 I said all that. So here's our little picture, right? Closer to the equator, we have darker skin. And then now you have to take into consideration, like there's airplanes and people can move wherever the hell they want, right? So you have to look at indigenous populations. So not necessarily who lives there now, right? But the indigenous populations, where they evolved, whether they had light skin or dark skin, right? Because now we can live wherever the hell we want. But we just need to use a lot of sunscreen if we're light-skinned people living someplace with high UV irradiation. And then we would just, if you're very dark-skinned, you'd have to be careful about vitamin D, right? If you live somewhere that has very low, you move to Sweden and you have really dark skin, the sunlight out there is not going to cut it for you. You're going to have to take more vitamin D supplements, which we do anyways now in milk and so forth. Right? So light skin evolved because it helped the body produce vitamin T where there wasn't a lot of sun. Right? Not a lot of UV irradiation. Dark skin evolved because it protected the body's folate stores for people who lived in sunny areas. That's the hypothesis, right? Okay, and so blah, blah, blah. Here's our little thing about natural selection. In this case, they're using green, blue, and orange, right? But the same idea. And so make sure you look at that. Another good example is the shape of people's noses, right? The shape of your nose really makes you look unique. So siblings who have the same nose shape, even though everything else might look different, seem to look more similar to each other, right? Rather than they could have the same exact eyes, but if their nose is totally different, you wouldn't necessarily see the similarities. So it's, again, something that is very phenotypic, even though the shape of your nose is controlled by some developmental genes that can be not very different at all to make, a whole bunch of different shapes. And they think that it may be evolutionarily a function of the environment, right? If you were someplace in a very cold, dry region, right, a narrow nose is a selective advantage because your nose's job is to moisturize the air before it gets into your lungs, okay? And so if you're in a dry, either really hot, dry, or really cold, dry environment, a narrow nose is a selective advantage, okay? If you've ever done anything athletic when it's really cold and dry and you breathe through your mouth, it hurts your lungs. That dry air just literally dries out your lungs. Your lungs is all mucousy and wet, and that's how it exchanges oxygen and carbon dioxide. If it gets all dried out, it can literally crack and damage your tissues, okay? So if you come from someplace warm and wet, right, humid, well, generally tropical areas, you don't need a narrow nose. You can have a bigger, wider nose. That's much better for aerating, right? And that's the whole precedence of those breathe right strips. They sit on your nostrils and they open them up a little bit, right, so we don't snore at night. Athletes use them. It's easier to breathe through, right? So selectively, if you have no problems with moisture, you'd want to have a wide nose with big nostrils. That would be the best for us to survive and reproduce, especially if you're running around chasing woolly mammoths and running away from saber-toothed tigers and that sort of stuff, right? We always have to think about these traits as when we were cavemen, not today, right? Because now we just use the breathe right strip and we're fine. It doesn't matter if you have a narrow nose or not, right? Or you put that moisture stuff, right, when you go skiing and you put that little nose moisture stuff in there so you don't get all chapped. Okay, so that's another example of something that makes people look very different, or different cultures look very different from each other, but is a very small genetic change, and they think it's based on the environment. It evolved based on the environment. Aha! And then this is just for fun. This goes back to our sexual selection, and it was a study that was done and looked at mate choice in human beings. This is just a survey. They just showed people pictures, and you picked which one you want, which one you like the best. And so if you were a male, this is up in Norway, right? So mostly blonde, blue-eyed people up there, right? That's far in the north, so they don't have a lot of UV irradiation, so generally lighter skin. Men with blue eyes showed a preference for the women with blue eyes. So they just changed the eye color of all these pictures of women, and they consistently picked the ones with the blue eyes. Okay? If the male had brown eyes, there was no preference in the survey, statistically. Females didn't seem to matter, and so they thought that the evolution or the prevalence of blue eyes in those type of areas was due to sexual selection. Right? Having blue eyes or brown eyes in a place with very little UV irradiation, right, there's no selective advantage to having either, right, as far as survival and reproduction. But if you had blue eyes and more boys dug you, then you were more likely to survive and reproduce. Okay? So brown eyes, again, just like our skin, the pigment in your eye helps protect your eyes from UV irradiation. Right, so very light-colored eyes have less natural sunscreen, right? So it's much more sensitive to the sun. Blue-eyed people and green-eyed people in general seem to feel the need to have sunglasses on much more so than a dark brown-eyed person, right? Much more light-sensitive, and it's the same idea. It helps, the brown pigment helps block some UV irradiation, right? But up north, where there isn't much, it shouldn't matter. But blue eyes became much more prevalent in that area, they think, because of sexual selection, not natural selection. Who would know? Now you do. Okay. So now we're actually on today's lecture. And so we're going to, oh, Nelly. We're going to try to play a little video. I have no idea what our volume looks like here. But I think you'll like it.
Yo, what's up? This is Professor Bill Durham from the 2009 Galapagos Field Seminar. And right now we're touring the archipelago, trying to wrap our minds around the vast web of life on this planet. It's been changing, adapting for billions of years.
That's what's
so in honor of Darwin's 200th birthday, we're going to help educate you on how life builds.
So there's this little theory, some people fear it, but if you want to know the history of life, you gotta hear it. And if you feel leery, then stop and hear me. And what better place to start than with Charles Darwin? Damn. It's the baddest book I ever seen. The Origin of Species got me feeling like I'm feeding for some reading on the set with modification. So many barnacles, so much variation. He got inspired by some finches, not to mention Thomas Malthus and the struggle for existence. Think about it, if there were hella elephants growing exponentially with none remaining celibate, we'd all be swimming in elephantal juices. So what decides who survives and reproduces?
Diverse competitors, environment conditions. Plus remember what CD learned from fidgeting with pigeons. By selecting their fates and mating them, he could shape some pretty wild traits as if creating them.
And if man could do it, then why not natural forces? Diversity, heredity, plus struggle for resources. Combined together, weeding out the mockingbirds whose lack of fitness lead to lack of offspring.
The successful lineage is free to grow. It's evolution and it started 3.5 billion years ago.
This is how life builds from 3.5 till.
This is how life builds from 3.5 till. This is how life builds from 3.5 till.
This is how life builds from 3.5 till.
This is how life builds from 3.5 till. This is how life builds from 3.5 till.
This is how life builds from 3.5 till.
This is how life builds from 3.5 till. Yeah, the theory's making sense, but this is science, so where's your evidence?
Well, life makes colossal moves, that's what fossils prove, and archaeopteryx should really jostle you.
Plus, take a look at deoxyribo, nucleic acid in every cell that I know. The basic building blocks of life in me, in your mama, in a llama, and in boobies. Plus in nukes, fleas, and protists. And comparing embryos and vertebrae should help you notice.
You know this, so let's hit Galapagos, where we dropping flows while lava goes, stop and pose.
Galapagos, it's evolution in the flesh. A few millimeters might mean life or death. Speciation got me feeling psychotic. Got 20 finch rims and they all freeze. I got
In the
it.
pouch, the fire acquires females desire, a sexually selected trait that males acquire, an extraordinary adaptation, a friggin' prerequisite for copulation.
Amazing, the way that life keeps living. But the truth is, with humans, that's not always a given. So best to show some respect to life, lest ya forget we all share a common ancestor.
Yeah, this is how life builds from 3.5 till.
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 This is how life builds from 3.5 till. This is how life builds from 3.5 till.
This is how life builds from 3.5 till.
This is how life builds from 3.5 till.
Yo, you know there are a lot of animals all around the island?
Oh man, yeah, I think I saw a couple.
Yeah, you know they all straight chillin'.
Alright man, well tell me who's chilling.
There's kaboobies, you know they chillin'.
Flightless cormorants is always chilling.
Marine iguanas, you know they chillin'.
Galapagos sea lions are always chilling.
Yeah.
All right. It's everything we learned in one video. So just know that, and it's all good. All right, questions, comments, concerns. Hey, we have an exam a week from today, people. Yay! You're supposed to say yay. No? Yeah? Yes. There will be 50 multiple choice questions. Yes, you need the Scantron, which I thought I put in the syllabus, but apparently I didn't. So it's the 50 multiple choice, regular green skinny guy, 50 on each side. Okay, so, just that standard little guy. And a number 2 pencil with an eraser. Yeah, so this is midterm number 1. So there'll be 3 midterms and then a comprehensive final at the end. Okay, so the last couple weeks of class will be included in the final. We won't have a 4th exam over, I don't know, the last 2 weeks or something. Okay, so everything we get through Thursday this week will be fair game for the test. Okay? Yeah, so the definitions are something that you should memorize. Okay? Most of the questions are not going to be, tell me the definition of whatever. Some of the quiz questions are, because A, just trying to give you points, and to make sure you at least know the definitions of stuff. Most of the questions are going to be set up as some kind of situation, and you tell me what it is. Okay, so like, for example, if I told you something about, you know, a population starts and all the flowers in this field are all different colors, and then we go back 100 years later and they're only red color, that would be directional selection. What kind of selection was occurring in this field? And then you'd look and find directional selection, right? They went from a mix of everything to only one extreme, right? If they went to two extremes, that would be the diversifying selection. If they all stayed in up to an average middle color, then that would be stabilizing selection. Okay? So the question won't be what's the definition of diversifying selection. It'll give you an example of diversifying selection. You find the answer. Okay? The best way to take multiple choice tests so that you're not tricked into picking the wrong answer is to come up with the answer before you look at your choices. To treat all of them as if they're fill in the blank, right? If it was at all a fill in the blank test, you just have to know that's diversifying or directional selection, right? You just write directional selection. That would be a way better way to test people, okay? We use multiple choice because there's 230 people in here. And grading a fill-in-the-blank exam for 230 people, 50 questions, would kill me. Okay? Not because we love multiple choice, and multiple choice are a pain in the ass to write, and they're a pain in the ass for you guys to take. But it's just a function of how we do classes now. Right? Essay would be better. Just tell me everything you learned. Talking to each one of you would be ideal. But we would die. We couldn't possibly. I couldn't spend 4 hours with each one of you at the end of, during finals week to see what you've learned. That's actually the best way of assessing somebody's knowledge. So we can't do the best thing. We do the best that we can under our circumstances. If you treat it like fill in the blank, you can't be tricked out of the answer you know. Because some of the answers are going to look good, and then you might go, oh, crap. Is it really directional, or is it, oh. And then you might second guess yourself, right? Or if you didn't come up with anything in your head and you're just looking for the answer, and then you go, oh my God, now I can't remember the definition of any of these because I'm freaking out, right? I'm in the middle of a test. So you come up with the answer first. That's your gut answer. That's what you know. And you only change your gut answer if you come up with a specific reason why that's wrong. Right? Like you're looking, you said directional selection, and then you're looking through the answers, and that's not there. Then you go, oh, shit. Right? And then you reread the question, and maybe it was asking something a little different. You made, you read it quickly, or you go, oh, she's not talking about that. She just wants to know, is it natural selection? Is it sexual selection? Is it convergent evolution? Right? And so then you take a step back. You were being more specific. The question was really asking something general, okay? Because otherwise, all of them are going to look good, or at least two of the four are going to look pretty good, okay? And you don't want to pick the wrong answer because I suggested it in the multiple choice. So any of the ones that you can do as fill in the blank, and really actually write it on the stupid paper test. You can write all over that stupid test, okay? You can't scribble on your Scantron because it'll mess up the machine. But you can take notes on the paper test, you can write the answer next to it, and then you put your hand over the answers, write it, yeah, and then you just pick it, right? Boom, you go on. Yeah. His question is, will any of the questions from the quiz be on the test? Theoretically, no, but possibly because I might not remember which ones I put on the quiz and which ones I didn't. Okay, I try to keep them in separate banks, but some of them might be similar, right? I'm going to ask you a simple question about evolution. Evolution is most generally known as a change in characteristics in a population over time, right? Change, population, time. Not individuals, right? That's an adaptation. Not in a species, because, right, populations, right, the whole species might live all over the whole world, but a specific population of them might change. That's how we get a new speciation event. Okay? So that's going to be on the exam for sure. Yeah. The question is, are you getting a study guide? Yes, your study guide are these slides. Right? Everything on the stuff we talk about in class is what you need to know. So if I made a study guide for you, I would just pull all the figures out and turn this into a Word document. Right? Because the book, otherwise I'd say, here's 7 chapters in the book. I'll see you in 4 weeks. Right? You just need to know all of this, and then I give you a test. So the study guide is what we talk about in class. The best way for you to pull that together is, again, to take the definitions out of here, rewrite them, make flashcards, however you like to do that, right? Come up with your own questions. What do you think I might ask? Make a multiple choice question out of some of these. Set up a situation about directional, stabilizing, diversifying, right? Me putting stuff together for you, even in slides like this, is not a good way for brains to learn. It's actually doing you a disservice, okay? You guys have to actively engage in the learning process, right? And again, writing things down has been statistically shown to help your brain remember things better. And doing stuff over time, right? If you haven't studied at all yet, oh, I kill you. Please start today. Right? You have 7 days to jam all of this information into your head. Okay? If you do it all day long, off and on, way better than trying to jam it all in your head at one time. Okay? Looking at definitions, remembering stuff, do it 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes at lunch, 10 minutes at nap time, 10 minutes at dinner or during dinner, right? All that stuff over and over and over and over. If you do that, you almost cannot not remember. It's just jammed in your head, and you can't help but know it. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, so there's a link. Thank you for reminding me. There's a link at the top of the Moodle that is the free resources from our book, and it has self-quizzes. I think it has flashcards. It probably has some cheesy activities, right? I think there's animations in there. That's a great way to break up your studying, right? Again, you don't want to be bored when you're studying, because then you're not paying attention anymore. Like, I remember reading the same paragraph 14 times. I still don't have any idea what that paragraph was about, right? So sometimes you're looking at your notes. Sometimes you're reading the book. You can go to that website, take some self-quizzes, go, holy shit, I don't know anything. Or, yes, I totally know this section, move on, right? Do some of the activities, watch an animation, you're bored with that, Google something, watch a YouTube video on one of the things, right? Go back to your notes, make sure you memorize those stupid definitions, right? Put it all together, give yourself, the book site's really nice. Most textbooks make you pay for their web activities. These guys are giving it to us free, so we should definitely take advantage of that. Yeah, thank you for reminding me. I forgot to mention that. Okay? Study, study, study. Go! Yeah. Oh, I don't know. That's a good question. What is the word of the day? Hold on, let me spy at what I'm talking about. Watch, I probably just screwed this whole thing up. Oh my God. I can't see. If I could see, that would help me. You guys are going to have to help me with word of the day. How about penguin? I don't know. Okay, secret word of the day. Now penguin. Woo! Look at you guys. You guys are just little spark plugs. I know it's early. I'm sorry. Okay, so we're going to talk, oh my God, about ecology, population ecology, sort of how species and populations interact with each other, right? So far, really, we've only been talking about relationships of populations with each other or populations between, but all within the same species, right? So we're talking about gene flow between two populations, but of the same species. When we start talking about ecology, we start talking about all the organisms and like their environment, stuff that's not living, like whether you live in a pond or in sand or that kind of stuff, right? So more of the big picture. So all of the crap we've already talked about still applies. This just makes it a little more complicated, right? Because natural selection is acting on, right, a population, but other organisms and other things in the environment can affect it, right? So your species may eat a specific type of nut, and so you're in competition with others of your species to get these nuts. The best ones of you guys getting a nut are the ones that survive and reproduce. There may be 5 other species that eat that nut also that you're also competing with. We haven't talked about any of that yet. So now we're going to add that stuff into this whole deal. So we'll talk about individuals, populations, the community, and ecosystems. Oh, look at that guy. So as an individual, I think you guys have a grasp at what that means, right? One guy of one particular species, one wolf. Big bad wolf, right? A population, we've already talked about, a bunch of wolves of the same species living in the same area. A pack of wolves. Okay. At the community level, right, what do the wolves prey on? In this case, that's a moose. Okay. So the wolves prey on the moose, ticks infest moose, right? Ticks are a parasite, and then moose feed on trees. So all these guys interacting together would be studying something at a community level. Okay. And then in the ecosystem, we would also look at how are the effect of all of these animals on the environment, right? The moose eat all the trees, changes vegetation, which may change the landscape, right? If there are no wolves around, then there may be a higher population of mooses, and therefore more small sapling trees will get chewed up, which means there's going to be more areas of open meadow and less dense forest. Okay. Whereas suddenly you introduce a whole bunch of wolves to the situation, they munch out all the weaker moose, right? They just have a feeding frenzy, so there's not so many moose, more saplings survive, the forest encroaches, there's less meadow, more forest. Okay. So we can, the interactions of the living organisms, right, can change the whole landscape, right? Change that entire system, depending on who's living there. Okay. So whenever we're talking about ecology, we usually look at distribution patterns of what's out there and try to understand why they're in certain distributions and how that affects their ability to survive and reproduce. And so we're going to give some examples of that. And so in general, out there, organisms can form a clumped type population dispersion, be uniformly distributed, or be randomly distributed. As it turns out in nature, the most popular distribution is clumped. And we'll give some examples of each one of those and why they end up looking like that. Okay. So first we'll do random, right? In a random dispersion, it suggests that individuals are equally likely to survive any place in there. Okay, there's not necessarily competition between them. These organisms can end up growing close to each other, far away. They're not dependent on being nearby, right? They sort of seem to grow anywhere. There's no real pattern to it. It's random. Okay, so that's easy to remember because random is random. As long as we understand what that means. And so this type of plant seems to have a random distribution. It suggests that it doesn't need to grow near a tree or near a thing of water or near any other plant. It's perfectly fine growing either close to a tree, close to another plant, or far away. Okay. in a clump distribution usually happens when there's some resource that's not universally or randomly arranged. Something where those organisms do really need to stay together. And the example in our book is fish that swim in schools. I think a better example would be in lots of types of trees in forests require an old dead log to grow in. So a tree has to fall down and die, and then as that log starts rotting, that provides really good nutrients for new trees to come up. So they tend to all come up in a line in this big clump along this nurse log. Okay, so then all the new trees will be in this one big clump right here, and then another clump farther away where another old tree had fallen, and so forth. Right? Because they can't, if the seeds just fall on the bare earth, there's not enough nutrients there. They need that rotting wood and all that carbon in there, and the fertilizer that the bacteria and the fungus and breaking down the wood is providing for them. And so the only way those trees can grow is clumped, because they're all from, have to be on this tree. Right? Or you can only survive near water. So all of those organisms are going to be clumped near the pond. So if there's a pond here, and here, and here, and here, that's the only place you're going to find those organisms. Right? You're not going to find them someplace in the middle, because they need that water to survive. And then look at these penguins. Yay. Thanks for playing, guys. Okay, and so in this case, they're more uniformly distributed, mostly because of territorial behavior. Okay, and that seems to be a common theme out there. So if they're building nesting sites, they defend the area around their nest. They don't want anybody else coming near them, right? So if they defend a 1.5 feet around their nest, then there's no way two nests are going to be closer together than a 1.5 feet or 2 feet apart, right? Because each one's going to defend that little circle, and so they all end up being fairly regularly distributed. Okay? Same with really any kind of territorial animal. Lots of birds are like that, and they'll show up, one every 1/2 mile, because that's their territory, and they defend it. If any other birds come into that territory, they kick them out or try to kill them, right? So the nest would be in the middle of their territory, and if the territory is 1/2 mile in radius, right, then the nests are going to be evenly distributed throughout this area, rather than randomly distributed, right? Now, if birds don't give a crap, then they'd be randomly distributed or clumped, depending on what trees they like to build a nest in. Okay? So depending on the behaviors of the individual types of organisms depends on how they actually distribute themselves out in, I was going to say out in society, but in the ecosystem. Okay. So we talked a little bit about growth rates earlier and populations, but when we're talking about population ecology, they like us to bring this up again. So we talked about exponential growth, and that's where a population can keep growing and doubling in size as long as there's enough resources. But generally, in most places, there aren't unlimited resources, right? It's a finite area of wherever this population might be. And so at some point, they are going to reach a place where they can no longer expand anymore. They're out of food, they're out of places to live, they're out of water. Okay, and so then that would block their growth. And the growth rate really is the difference between birth rate and death rate in any kind of population, right? If birth rate and death rate are exactly the same, there's no growth, right? Every time one's born, something croaks. So you'd keep the same exact population size. So in order for any kind of growth to occur, the birth rate has to be much higher than the death rate. Okay. So the place where it starts leveling off and you can't increase your population anymore, we refer to as the carrying capacity of that given area. Okay? You're out of food, you're out of water, or that's as much food and water, that's the number of this population that can survive. Right? That's all we got. Okay? And so at that point, that's all the environment can support for whatever, whether and it could be any rate limiting step. It could be water, it could be food, it could be places to live. You can't support any higher population. Either the birth rate has to go down or the death rate goes up, or both, when you reach the carrying capacity, right? Because if you have too many babies and there's no food to feed them, right, they would die, okay? And the old, weak would die off too, probably first. And so this is just an example of what a graph might look like, right? Exponential growth is very steep. This is where they're doubling. And at some point, in most situations, you're going to run out of food or water or some place to stay. Some resource is going to become limiting, and you reach that carrying capacity, okay? And usually it's not so like, hey, okay, we're just going to stop reproducing now, right? Usually you hit that and you have a major die-off of organisms, at least in nature. Okay, and so here's an example of wolves and moose, which generally fluctuate around the carrying capacity of either one. And you can see from this graph, if you see the moose are in blue, right? As moose populations go up, wolf population follows after that. And surprise, when there's a lot more wolves there, then suddenly the moose populations go down because the wolves are eating them, as it turns out. Okay? And then as the moose population goes down over time, now there's nothing left for the wolves to eat, but they had all these moose and had all these babies, right? Because they had so much food. Suddenly there's not so much food, then the population of wolves may crash. They may starve a whole bunch starve over the winter. Because that population went down, now all the moose babies the next spring survive. Now there's a whole bunch of moose. Well, the wolves have a lot of food again, and so then they eat a lot of food, have a lot of babies, and so forth. And so they sort of follow each other in this pattern of high population, low population. And so predator-prey sort of cycle with each other. Okay? And that just makes sense because there's lots of food available, especially in animals that can have a litter. If there's tons of food available and the females have a lot of body fat, they might have 14 pups. If their food is not available, they don't have a lot of body fat, they may only have 3. Okay, so the birth rate can change with the health of the females in a lot of these organisms. Or they may have the same number, but only a few of those survive. Yeah? They usually call it a cycle of predator-prey interaction. Right? And so it's like a boom and bust. Right? They're suddenly, you get a whole bunch of the population, and then they crash. And so if you look at lots of different predator-prey interactions, especially when one predator and one prey are their major sources of either, so the wolf is essentially the only predator of the moose, right? The moose is a pretty ginormous animal. A fox is not going to take down a moose, and a coyote is not going to take down a moose, okay? So its only predator is the wolf, right? Wolves can eat other stuff, but their main favorite food is the moose, so they cycle with each other. Okay? Now, if it's a predator that eats a whole bunch of, it can eat rabbits, it can eat the mice, it can eat birds, then when you're out of rabbits, you just move on to something else. So it's less likely to cycle than if they're really linked to each other. Okay? Now, if rabbits are the prey of lots of predators, and suddenly there's a rabbit famine or some disease and all the rabbits die, then lots of predator populations may crash with it. Yeah, if I gave you an example, I would probably call this a predator-prey relationship where populations cycle with each other. Right? So it doesn't it doesn't have diversifying a particular name. Just the concept, the idea that the predators and prey, their populations do fluctuate, and generally as prey will go up first, then predator, prey drops, then predator, and so forth. That's a good question. Thank you. Okay. Well, we just talked about this, right? So either your birth rate has to decrease or the death rate increases or both. right? And if you're at the carrying capacity and there's no growth at all, your birth rate would equal your death rate. Okay, that just makes sense. Then your population stays stable. There's 100 in this population, 1 is born, now there's 101, somebody croaked. Now you're back to 100. Okay, or something very, it doesn't have to be 1 to 1, but very similar. So you're not getting growth and you're not getting loss. You're sort of staying even right around that carrying capacity. Okay, and then here's an example, again, when we talked about the wolves and the moose populations going up and down. We could also, and from the original example, we can also look at tree growth, right? Something else in the environment that might cycle along with that trend. And in this case, they're talking about as the moose population goes up, the tree, I can't think of the word tree. The tree, slower growth of the trees or the tree populations go down, right? Because the moose actually eat the bark off of trees and eat small saplings and so forth, right? And then as your moose crash, because, oh, look, we're making, like wolves are going nuts, we're making babies, eating moose, right? And then our trees start to respond back, right? Oh, we're getting some more moose. Oh, they're eating all the trees. Okay, so so it doesn't have to just be 3 things. Like really, in the real environment, everything is interrelated. Okay, and so removing one of these guys from this community might have a huge impact on something else. Okay, especially if they're a main predator or a main grazer or something like that. Right now, if we're talking about a whole bunch of different types of mice and one mouse species gets a virus and disappears, probably not going to make that big of a difference in this community, right? If there's a whole bunch of other little rodents that everybody can eat, right? But if it's something big in the environment, you can see what a major impact that would have, right? If we completely remove the moose, the wolves may end up hunting something else, but their population is probably going to decline a lot. And then the trees are going to grow much more quickly, and that may change, again, like we said, the total landscape. Less meadow, less open area, more dense forest. In dense forests, wolves don't like to live there anyways. The wolves may leave, right? Either they die, they can't find anything to eat, or they're smart enough to leave and go somewhere else. Okay, so they can have major impacts on each other when we think of them all together in this big community population. Okay. And then this is just, I liked it because it has poop in it, how ecologists study the sort of the health of an ecosystem, right? So these are graduate students, and they go run out there in the field, and they want to see how is this how healthy is the community? Do we have lots of wolves? Do we have lots of moose? What are our trees like? And so one of the best ways to track animals is to actually just look for their poop. So wouldn't it be nice to call home and tell your mom that your master's thesis project is all about finding moose poop, right, and looking at it. And you can actually get DNA from the moose poop, right, and then you can like figure out which moose took a crap where. It's very exciting. Okay. Rather than actually finding a moose, because as it turns out, they're not friendly, and they will try to kill you. And that's just the moose. Imagine trying to find a wolf. So you'd much rather just find evidence of the wolf to count them rather than an actual wolf. I don't think your mom would be happy if you told your mother you were going to go catch wolves. It's a school project, Mom. It's for Bio 100. Okay, and then if we look at things that are outside of the living world, right? So we talk, all these stuff are all living components. We talked about the trees and wolves and their predators. What about other stuff that happens? What about climate change or so forth? And so if we look at stuff in the non-living environment, and we'll talk about global warming because, that's a, I was going to make a really bad joke. That's a hot topic. Oh, come on, these are the jokes, people. Work with me. I know, he's like, oh. I know, you can groan. Oh, okay, I like that too. Okay, So the climate change, right, up north, it's been warmer and warmer and warmer, which means, as it turns out, insects that normally die off during the winter because it's frozen, right? If it's not so frozen or permafrost melts, so lots more ticks available. Ticks actually, when they, like if they get on your dog or yourself, like they suck blood, right? So they suck your blood, and they carry all kinds of nasty parasites and worms, like tapeworms and all that kind of stuff, which is why, you know, you put the tick stuff on your dog before you go hiking, because the tick's not so bad. You just pull that guy off, but whatever it puked into your dog's bloodstream, you know, is going to end up coming out of your dog's butt. Worms. Ew. Okay. And so anyway, so they make the moose very sick. Okay. So thousands of ticks at a time, which ends up killing off moose, right? Oh, that poor little guy lost all his hair, and then he's just going to be wolf food. Okay. So a change in climate, again, can affect this environment. Okay. And so if climate continues to warm, right, we could lose lots of organisms that live in specific areas, or we could see evolution happening, right? If there was certain moose that had a different density of hair or something that the ticks didn't like, right, and those guys had less ticks populating them, they would have a survival advantage, survive and reproduce. Over time, there may be, you know, tick-proof moose out there or something. Right? That's a stupid example, but you get the idea, right? Any change in environment could be a disaster for what's existing there, but could lead to speciation or evolution or adaptation to the environment. Yeah? Yeah, so then the wolves are just chowing down, right? And so then the wolf population's going to go up, but then at some point, right, there's less and less moose out there, and so then the wolves are going to come down also. Okay. So this is just an example of how the environment, or right, you put up a dam somewhere and block the water flow of a stream, that changes in the entire ecology of the next, you know, 1,000 miles of that river, because you put a dam and block the flow, or there's a drought or so forth, right? And you lose that river ecology, and then that changes all the organisms, changes plants, changes all kinds of stuff based on a small climate change or, you know, small weather type thing. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, a monkeys might fly out of my butt.
It's possible. Penguins! Aw, they're so cute. All right. See, I'm not set up. Oh, I'm not even logged in. I gotta get my act together, people. All right, let's go here first. See what I should have had set up for you people? It's thinking, it's thinking. Does anybody have any questions while my computer's thinking? It said no. It just said I'm out. Did I type in the wrong? Oh, I've been authenticated. That's so cute. All right, we're in. Are we ready? Do you have your texting thumbs ready? It must be this question. Ooh. I don't know. Let's see if it looks okay. Okay. So remember that graph I showed for exponential growth? And the carrying capacity was up here, right? And no growth was down here, and then it made that that shape. So what does that graph look like? right? Exponential growth suggests they're doubling, right? So quick growth, fast growth. And you can look in your notes, you know, you don't have to. Just trying to get you some free points here, people. Oh, that's going to go to sleep. Are they texting? They're texting. They're sending answers. Yeah. So like just like a little piece. Oh, so like yeah. Yeah. I was just trying to, I don't know how else to. The beginning, the middle, the end. Just that's all it means. Everybody's tired. I was irritated at my daughter's teacher this morning. Who's going to be a teacher in here? All right. Okay, let's not do this. How about this? Let's play Don't Ever Do This. So what have I been crabbing at you guys about all semester? Yeah, over time, right? Little by little, this. So my second grader comes home with 16 pages of math homework. Due this morning because they have a test today over it. Fucking kidding me? OMG. Oh. They're killing me. That's the exact opposite of what you're supposed to be teaching kids. You're supposed to, how about 2 or 3 pages a night all last? She had no homework last week. None. 0. I just had to get that off my chest. So don't do that. So yeah, we'll see what happens. It's not good. All right, come on, people, let's go. We have fun stuff to do. All right, oh, there we go. Is everybody's text going through? Are we having issues? No, we're just having issues, but it's not to do with our text. All right, I'm going to pretend to disable, even though it really doesn't work. Oh. This was hard. So it's really the first one, right? It's that steep part, right? That's where it's doubling, right? If going across here is numbers, right? And time, or numbers and time, right? It's just that stupid steep part, okay? The very beginning is where it's still flat, where they're kind of ramping up, and then pretty soon you get 2, and then 4, and then 8, and then 16, and whatever the rest it goes, okay? And then the carrying capacity is the flat part. That's where there's no growth at all, okay? Right? That flat part up top is the carrying capacity. That's where birth rate equals death rate. So exponential growth, we're not doubling in our amounts. Okay. That's a good try. All right, let's keep going. What do we have next? Oh, nothing exciting. Oh, that's because we need to get a little ahead. Okay. So we're looking at, are we at the carrying capacity for human beings, right? This is a little bit of an older, I don't know when this, 2007, so yeah, we have a lot more people now, right? Like the whole 7 billion people on this planet, that's a little crazy. Okay. What is the carrying capacity of our planet? And so estimates being depending on growth rates and so forth. But how would they estimate what our carrying capacity would be on the planet? Yeah, our ability to live within our means, right? Are we at the maximum amount of food are we pumping out agriculturally? Probably not, right? We do pretty well, at least in developed countries, right? But there's lots of countries where their ability to produce more food with better technology and better training could really improve their ability to feed more people, right? Any kind of new technology coming out can give us the ability to have more people on the planet. So if they're estimating just based on technology today and no more geniuses are ever born, right? We're not going to invent anything amazing ever again, then our carrying capacity would be a lot lower than if we can count on people being able to solve problems and figure out how to feed more people with less space and so forth. Right? So it really depends. So it's really hard to predict what the carrying capacity of the world would be. And then this was just what we talked about a little bit with the reaching your carrying capacity. In general, you don't just ease up to it and sort of stay at it. There's usually a bust and crash type thing, just like we saw with the predators where, right, you exceed the carrying capacity, there's a die-off that goes down below it. Well, now there's extra food, so then you exceed and you go back and forth. And sometimes you do see stabilization about the carrying capacity. Sometimes you don't at all. And that just depends on whatever population you happen to be studying. So that's riveting, I know. And then the last thing that we're going to, I think, talk about today is sort of human population growth. And this is important for understanding how populations on our planet are increasing. And so if we look at two different human populations, and first let's look at the one on the right in the United States, okay, which would be considered a stable or slower growing population. And you can see by the bars across is how many males on the left and how many females on the right in millions, right? So almost 10 million females that are below 5 years of age, okay? And if you look at what they consider the childbearing years in red, those are, well, they should be about 15, but they have it between 20 to 40, right? Those are the females that have the ability to give birth. So that's where the growth is going to come from, right? Growth, or the doubling, right, in the future is going to come from the childbearing years, okay? And then we can see as they age, our population declines some. That makes sense. As we get older, the population does get smaller. And as you can see, the women at the top, over 85, are far outliving the men, which seems strange. Okay, anyways. And so what they're saying is, if you're looking at how many kids there are, there's about the same number of children under 5 or even under 10 as number of childbearing adults, right? That suggests that each couple's having about 2 kids, right? They're replacing their population, but they're not exceeding it, right? So that would mean either there's going to be no growth in the population or very slow growth, right? Some couples might have 4, some might have 0. But the average is about 2. Okay? You're not going to grow your population if you're doing replacement, right? Because by the time these guys are going to die, right, this population here in 10 years is going to move up into childbearing, right? If they do replacement, right, then, and so it's going to stay about the same. Okay? If we look at a developing country that's fast growing, and we look at the childbearing years, right, those that are in their childbearing years, they're having more kids, right, than their numbers. So each couple is having more than 2 kids because this population is much bigger than the individuals in those childbearing years, which suggests in 10 years when these guys are in childbearing, if they're still having more than replacement, this line will be even bigger on the bottom, right? And you'll get a fast-growing population. Okay? because they're having more children, right, more than replacement, 4 to 5 each rather than 2 each. So this type of graph, where it's wider on the bottom, with kids that are going to move into childbearing, which then, if all of those have 4 kids and so on, you will have a much faster growing population here than a stable population where childbearing and the number of children are about the same. Okay. Does that make sense? So you can tell just by looking at the current population that if this trend continues, this will be a fast-growing population. Right? The only way to stop that is for when these individuals move into childbearing age to have them do only replacement, right? Which is what China did because their population was exploding. Their graph looked like this, right? And so they, because it's a communist country and they could do that as a dictatorship, right? All couples can only have 1 child. We need to stop population growth and actually downsize population, right? Not just stop it and do replacement, actually decrease our population. We cannot feed all these people. Every couple can only have 1 child, okay? And so that is an extreme way to deal with population growth, okay? So their graph even looks, right, it's fatter in the middle and smaller down here. Okay, so anyone that has more kids than childbearing, the population is just going to keep growing unless they actively do something about it. Okay. Oh. I know, you guys want to go. Can I just look really quick? Can I look and see how many slides I have in here? No, I can't. Oh, it's 1 billion. Okay, I'm going to do this really fast. I know you're mad at me. When you're a teacher, don't ever do this. Don't make your students stay till the last minute. So I'm just going to start this because Thursday we have a lot to get through and we have some good video clips. So we don't want to miss that stuff. And we already talked about this a little bit, right? We talked about the community. That's all the different interacting populations, different species living together in the same area. And the idea of a keystone species, I already talked about. I just didn't mention what it was. A keystone species would be like that wolf in the wolf, moose, tree, tick whole interaction. Where if we pull away that wolf, we're going to get tons of moose. They're going to eat all the trees, and it's going to change the environment completely. It's no longer going to be a woodland, mixed with meadow. It's going to be mostly meadow or grassland. And then if it becomes grassland, then the moose are going to leave and other organisms are going to come in. And this area's ecology or ecosystem is going to change completely. So a keystone species is anything where you remove it from that area and it changes the entire ecosystem. So that stupid little mouse that died off for whatever reason is not a keystone species because nothing really changed. Right? There might be a few less, hunting hawks or something, but not enough to just decimate this whole area because there's lots of other little rodents for all these big predators to eat. Okay? So a keystone species is when a dramatic impact on the community and may even change the environment completely. Okay? Yeah? Right, so rabbits to Australia was the opposite. That was like introducing an alien species, and that just messed up the entire ecosystem there, right? Because the rabbits were just ravaging all the plants and destroying them, and they didn't have any natural predators. I can't remember why they brought them there, but whatever they were trying to do, it didn't work. And same with like mongoose, they introduced in different places. So that's an introduction of an alien species. But an example might be like if all the beavers die off in this area of stream, there's not going to be any lakes. Beavers dam it up, build lakes, that all these other organisms can come in and live, and muskrats and blah, blah. If you get rid of the beavers, that changes the ecology. It goes back to a fast-running stream again, which completely different animals live in that area, and completely different plants and algae and all other kind of crap, too. Okay, you guys are free. Thank you for playing today.